Room 208. He saw the small plaque on the door, held up the old-timey key they had handed him at the reception, and his lips formed a smile. This old hotel was everything he had imagined it would be. From the first moment he had laid eyes on it, he had known. This place here wasn't just haunted, no. It almost seemed cursed, in a strange and off-putting way. Trey looked up and down the small hallway with its dirty red carpet and the off-colored stains on the wallpaper, then back to the door. The room he was standing in front of wasn't giving off quite as many bad vibes as the rest, but that didn't matter much to him. Maybe a few decades ago, other people might have stayed here, making his work difficult. But as far as he could see, at least for tonight, he would be the only guest in this whole building. A low chuckle came out of his throat as he stuck the key into the keyhole, grabbed the handle, and opened the door. The heavy duffel bag was swinging at his side as he pushed the entrance out of his way and stepped into the room for the first time. He felt electricity in the air as soon as his boots crossed the threshold, but Trey didn't care. Right now, all he had eyes for was the layout of the room itself. Different words came to his mind. Small, shabby, outdated. One bed with covers that looked dusty. A TV on the wall that was small and seemed ready to fall from its mount at the lightest breeze. One more door leading to what he assumed would be a toilet and maybe a shower. He scoffed inwardly, then closed the entrance behind him and felt the vibrations in the air getting stronger. This place was cursed, he reiterated in his mind. Trey walked over to the bed, put his duffel bag down on the cheap mattress, and heard the springs squeak the moment any weight touched them. How could a place like this survive in modern times? It looked like no one had come here in years, maybe even a decade. He could see dust covering the top of the TV and smelled this musty stench stemming from wet mold beneath the cheap wallpaper, and wherever he looked, stains seemed to cover every single surface inside this room. Roadside motels would have a fresher, cleaner look than this, and they would be far cheaper as well. But they wouldn't give him what he was looking for. The only reason a place like this could still exist was if the owner had some kind of attachment to it. Most of the time, buildings like this were handed down inside a family, each generation taking care of them one way or another, until the owners felt like the brick and mortar itself had become part of the family tree. Only in this case, it didn't feel like that at all. He had seen the owner downstairs in the reception area. The old woman had looked miserable and angry at having to spend her life here in this place. She probably had no one left to clean up and take care of the guests, so all those odd jobs would fall on her. Then, why would she stay? Why not sell this rotten place and live her own life somewhere else? Because something was keeping her here. Whether it was some kind of supernatural force or maybe even a curse didn't matter. Right now, this place was a hotspot of the kind that was hard to find. He could almost smell the resentment in the air from decades of being bound to something that was sucking the life out of their family. Trey opened the duffel bag and put his hand inside. His fingers were feeling around for one of the small hidden pockets. He found the zipper, opened it, and pulled some tiny rectangular object out of it. It was a box of matches, old enough to be his grandpa's, with a hardly visible print on top. He shook it as he always did, and listened to the sound of the matches bumping around in there. Still a dozen or so left, Trey told himself, and then looked at the room, and especially the ceiling again. He had seen the no smoking signs everywhere, but doubted anyone would notice even if he started a small campfire in the bathroom. There were no fire alarms anywhere, neither in the room nor the hallways, yet he still always checked to make absolutely sure. The last thing he would need was for the owner to come up here and throw him out before his work was finished. Trey opened a small box, pulled out a single match, and turned around once again. He mumbled a few words in a language hardly anyone alive still spoke, then walked over to the wall and scraped the match head against the rough wallpaper. For a moment, nothing happened. He held the match up, felt the air moving around him and toward his hand, then suddenly noticed the sharp, sulfuric smell hitting his nostrils. The sizzling cut through the normal noise of the hotel as Trey felt the vibrations in the air stopping for a moment. Above him, the bulb flickered, and suddenly the match caught fire and gave off a strange kind of light that seemed to flood the room in an instant. Trey took a deep breath and smelled the sulfur mixed with something truly unpleasant. The stench of blood and rot. In the strange light of the match, things started appearing after a few seconds. Foot and handprints, but they didn't look like something one would find in a normal building. The feet were deformed and elongated, with claw-shaped scratch marks in front of them, while the hands had 6, then 7 fingers that stood off at odd angles. Trey couldn't help but shiver at the sight. The tracks led from the entrance through the room, then up the wall and back over the ceiling. By the color and strength of the impression, he could hazard a guess when this thing had entered here, and by their size, he also knew how big it had become. A cursed being was residing in this place and had been for what looked like generations. The longer those things stayed bound to a spot, the more they started to change. 4 generations ago, it would have looked like a human. But now, judging by its tracks, it had already long since transformed into something completely different. This was the reason the old woman downstairs was forced to spend her days in this place. Maybe that was also the reason why the rooms and hallways looked so squalid. Had she tried to let this place die? Maybe she hoped the thing would perish with this hotel if people stopped coming. That was a bad plan, Trey knew. But he also had seen many, many victims trying dumb stuff to rid themselves of the ties that held them in place. Well, luckily for her, he was here right now, and he would get rid of this thing whether she wanted him to or not. He smiled and shook his hand. The flame burning the match went out, and not even a second later, all the tracks he had seen in here vanished as well. The room looked exactly like it had before, with stains and dust all over every single surface. Trey let the matchbox fall into the pocket of his coat, then threw the burned-out match into his duffel bag. He didn't want to leave any traces behind. Now, with the presence of something confirmed, he could go on to the next step of his plan. Finding out where this damned thing was hiding. All those cursors had rooms they felt safe in, and it was now on him to figure out which one it was. It would make the rest much easier if he knew beforehand where this thing would run to. He stuck his hand into the duffel bag again and pulled out a set of lockpicks, a concave glass lens, and 3 strips of paper covered in strange writing. For this job, he wouldn't need a big gun, Trey told himself with a smile, then turned and walked toward the door. Of course, it would be possible to find the curse if he just followed the footprints with the matches, but wasting those on something as easy as tracking such a thing would be a crime. Instead, he held out a small glass lens, looked through it, and could see a slight glimmer in the distorted view of the floor. Good enough to follow the tracks, Trey told himself again, then opened the door to this room and stepped out into the hallway. He could feel his brow furrowing as he looked at the floor there. The dirty red carpet was covered in tracks. His view through the lens was a single sea of shining particles flowing along the ground, the tracks covering each other by overlapping again and again. Trey felt a cold chill in the air as he looked more closely. Was this thing patrolling the hallways round the clock? That had to be the case. Or were there more than one? Trey looked closely and even got to his knees to get a better view. The tracks he could make out all seemed similar, with elongated feet and hands with too many fingers. No, it had to be one. His experience told him the same thing. These beings weren't social. They would devour each other until only one was left standing. So it had to be very active, walking up and down the hallways, checking the rooms. A bad feeling gripped him. He pulled out the one thing he always carried around with him. A translucent crystal that looked like the ones one could get at every small and dirty magic shop around the country. He held it up and felt it vibrating. Something was close by. Trey shivered, put the little trinket away immediately, stood up and pressed his back against the wall. It was here, the thing haunting the hotel. Very, very near. He tried to steady his breathing, then closed his eyes. If he concentrated, he could feel the air shifting around him ever so slightly. Right now, it should be somewhere to his left, coming toward him down the hallway. It wouldn't attack him now, he told himself. At least not unprovoked. As long as it didn't know he was tracking it, it would ignore him for the time being. If he stayed for a few days, it would be a different case, since those things tended to only notice intruders after some time. But if he raised the lens now and caught a glimpse of it, he would feel it. And that would make it very, very angry. With still closed eyes, he pressed his back against the wall and tried to get a feel for this thing's position. The air seemed to be moving toward him from his left. It felt colder than the rest. If he concentrated deeply, he thought he could hear the sound of feet and hands walking over the carpet. This thing was bigger than he had expected. The closer it came, the stronger he could sense it. This malevolence it exuded made sweat break out on his forehead. Its right hand almost touched his foot, and Trey felt a slight shiver running up his leg. So close, he thought. If he put out his leg, it would move through him. He would be able to feel it. His hand closed around the translucent crystal in his pocket. No, it wasn't the time yet. This thing was still far too strong and far too dangerous. It passed him by, and Trey felt the cold chill as the air around him turned freezing. Even without opening his eyes, he could feel the breath coming from his mouth, forming clouds in the hallway. This thing moved slowly and leisurely over the red carpet, then disappeared at the stairs next to the elevator. Only once he was absolutely sure that this curse wasn't close anymore did Trey dare to open his eyes. He was feeling cold and tired, stretched his limbs to get a bit of energy back, then straightened his jacket and went in the same direction as this thing. If it were moving around, looking for its room would become that much more dangerous. For his normal plan to work, it needed to be stationary. The less it moved, the better. But if he carelessly started following it, sooner or later the thing would spot him. Trey chose the elevator, stepped inside, and heard the whole cabin rattle as it descended to the first floor. This building was difficult to navigate with the thing running around freely. He needed more information. The elevator stopped and its door opened. Trey felt a bit relieved to not get stuck in that death trap at least, and headed to the reception area, where the old woman was sitting and reading a book. He could see the pressure she was under at first glance. There were dark rings around her eyes, her lips were scabbed over from being chewed on time and time again, and there was this nervous tremor in the hand holding the book. She only looked up at him once. She stopped right at the counter, and for a moment Trey thought he could see a plea in her eyes. He knew it very well, this look saying, "Just make it stop." Her family had pretty much forced her into this life. They looked at each other for a few more seconds before Trey finally opened his mouth.
I can help you,
he said, while keeping his expression as neutral as possible. The woman's eyes wavered, but only for a second. An almost manic grin appeared on her lips. Years of isolation, of constant stress, and maybe even torture seemed to have messed with her quite a bit.
And what would you help me with?
There was this complete lack of hope in her voice that seemed to chill the atmosphere. In all likelihood, this woman thought he was talking about buying the hotel or something like that. Maybe she had gotten some business propositions before. Trey had to let her know he knew that there was something else wrong with the hotel, besides the squalid condition of the building.
The thing stalking the hallways. I can help you with that.
He could see the woman's eyes grow cold as he mentioned the curse. There was a slight vibration running through the floor the next moment, and Trey reached out to touch the counter. He could feel the tremors running through the old and brittle wood.
It's getting angry,
the woman said in a monotonous voice. There was no doubt about that, Trey thought. Did it react to his presence or to her emotional state? Was it getting agitated because he had mentioned it? Her eyes left his as she looked past him and toward the ceiling above the reception area. Trey didn't need to turn around to know what had happened. This thing had appeared and was watching them. If he didn't leave immediately, it might get angry. He knocked on the wood twice, put up a big, wide smile, and gave the woman a nod.
You know, I heard there's a great movie playing close by. Why don't you go and watch it? It's my treat.
He put a few bills on the counter and could see the woman's eyes trembling again.
I can't leave,
she whispered, now looking back and forth between him and the thing on the ceiling.
It won't let me.
Those last words were hardly more than a breath, but he could hear the terror in them. The old woman was now close to tears, and Trey knew exactly what she meant. He could feel the air vibrating and noticed her push the money on the counter back toward him.
Maybe you could cut your visit today short? I'll refund you in full if you want.
The old woman offered, now in her usual monotonous voice. Trey shook his head immediately. Internally, he was cursing. With this thing hovering around, he wouldn't get a chance to find out more about it from the woman. And judging by her pleading eyes, his own time was running short as well. If this thing got angry, it might get ugly. He left the bills on the counter and shook his head. Maybe he could at least learn from her where this thing was staying when it wasn't on patrol.
I don't think I can find another place like this. But maybe I will change rooms if that is okay. I don't see many other guests. So, is there a room I can't have?
He tried to smile at her and felt the vibrations in the air getting stronger. Around him, the whole reception was growing colder and colder. The woman stared at him blankly, then shook her head. He could see the gears in her mind moving.
409. That room is off limits for guests. It used to be the owner's personal room, but I haven't been in there in a long time, so please stay away from it.
A glimmer appeared in the woman's eyes as she said those words. Trey felt as if something was reaching out to him. A cold hand was drawing closer to his neck. He quickly gave the woman a nod, then turned on his heels and walked toward the stairs. Cold air swirled around him as he hopped up the steps and moved quickly toward his room. The vibrations running through the ground were getting weaker. He wasn't sure if it was because he had stopped talking with the woman, or if it was because of the distance. Whatever the case was, this thing had now noticed him. From this point onward, it wouldn't simply pass him by. Trey had studied the history of the hotel well enough to know how this job could end. There had been a bunch of suicides and strange deaths inside these halls. Some people were found dead in their rooms, others jumped from high windows, and at least one woman had ended up in the water tank up on the roof. They all had one thing in common, though: a terrified expression on their faces, making them look like horrifying death masks. If he had seen them in person, he could have found out more, like what this thing did exactly with its victims. But right now, he didn't have time for that. Room 409 was his target. Trey hurried up the stairs and felt a cold breeze following him. It wasn't as close as before, but he could still feel its presence. Was it coming after him? Probably. He sped up once more, finally reached his floor, and raced toward the door to his room. With no one else around, he had left it standing open, which saved him a few important seconds. Trey jumped into the room and raced for the bed, seeing his duffel bag on the mattress. He pushed both his hands inside and started rummaging around. Beneath his fingertips, he felt paper, then metal, then glass, and cloth. There was a whole assortment of different weapons and trinkets, all bought and tested against many things. And today, he would need to face some kind of cursed being. It would follow him from now on, and if it caught him heading toward its room, it would definitely try to kill him. Trey pulled out 3 different things. A small leather pouch with grey powder to hold it in place, a death whistle to draw it in, a ceremonial dagger to hurt it. He could feel another cold breeze coming into the room through the open door, and knew that his time was almost up. Right now, he needed to keep this thing here while he went up to room 409. Trey straightened up, turned around, and pulled a small matchbox out of his pocket. The glass lens wasn't good enough for what was about to happen. He needed to see this thing to make sure his plan would work. With the temperature dropping rapidly, he knew it was close already.
No time to waste,
he told himself, pulled out one of the matches and struck it against the sole of his shoe, then held it up above his head. The air started rushing toward it, and Trey could smell that same sulfuric stench from before in his nostrils. Above him, the bulb flickered, and this time, goosebumps spread across his skin. He blinked, and suddenly the room felt completely different. The movement of the air seemed to stop as the match illuminated his surroundings in this strange light. Trey could feel the presence before he could even see it. There was a prickly sensation in the nape of his neck. A single bead of sweat was running down the side of his face. He turned slowly, and suddenly saw something inside the room that hadn't been there before. Right behind him, sticking to the ceiling, not the floor, he saw it. A being covered in dirty black fur. Its face seemed almost human, but its eyes were red, and he could see a row of sharp teeth behind the dark lips of its mouth. Right now, the thing was only staring at him. It wasn't moving or attacking, but Trey could feel the danger deep in his bones. It would lunge at him as soon as it realized that he could see it. He gripped a small pouch and slowly opened the knot of the cord at the top. Trey turned his head until he could only see the thing out of the corner of his eye. For now, he hadn't shown any reaction. Years of experience had taught him that. If it didn't notice that he could see it, it would be far easier. The knot on the pouch came loose as his feet touched the threshold of the room. He could see the thing moving. It was coming toward him, walking over the ceiling with slow, measured steps. Trey could smell the acrid stench this thing was giving off. He stepped over the threshold, turned his head, and their eyes met for the first time. 2 red orbs started to glow as they realized what was happening, but it was already too late. Trey tipped over the pouch, and this grey powder fell out and spread across the threshold as the thing jumped forward, stretching out one deformed hand with long claws on the 6 fingertips. The powder hit the floor and covered the threshold as he jumped back and looked at the outstretched hand of the monster. In the light of the lit match, he could see its anger and watched as the first claw hit the threshold and then shot back, as if blocked by an invisible barrier. The monster raged in there. Its mouth opened as it let out a silent scream, then jumped from the ceiling down to the floor and charged the threshold again. Trey smiled as he let out a relieved sigh. He had caught it. The cursed being started running around the room, attacking the threshold, but was unable to do anything. At least for now, it was safely trapped in there. Trey straightened his shoulders and turned away again. That powder he had used wouldn't hold it forever. Sooner or later, the thing would come free. It would be furious, and if he were still in this hotel, it would tear him apart, limb by limb. Trey hurried along the hallway toward the escalator and the stairs. In the light of the match, he could see the thing's tracks glowing everywhere. It must have come through here 6 times today, he thought, and felt the hair on the nape of his neck standing up. Something was off about this place. It seemed strange, even for his profession. Trey reached the stairs and the elevator, pressed the button to call it, and heard it rattling as it moved up from the lobby. 4th floor, 9th room, 409. That was where this thing had come from, and it would be the room where he would deal with it. He heard the loud ding as the elevator stopped, and suddenly Trey felt a cold chill deep in his bones. The match between his fingers was flickering softly, and air seemed to flow toward him from every direction. He turned his head back the way he had come. Had this thing already broken free? No, that was impossible. The doors to the elevator opened. He looked and saw the hallway glowing but empty. The thing hadn't come out here. Then why? Trey felt something looking at him. His ears were burning. He turned his head and could see 2 red eyes staring out at him from inside the elevator. Trey could feel the vibration in the air. How was it here? He had sealed it inside his room. No, he would have seen it if it had come after him. This thing was a second curse? Trey swallowed hard as the light of the match in his hand flickered, and for a split second the red eyes disappeared as if they had never been here in the first place. How could there be more than one? It didn't matter, Trey screamed at himself. He tilted the open pouch as the thing shot forward. Grey powder hit the floor in front of the elevator as the curse charged him with glowing eyes. Please make it. Trey was praying in the split second before the monster reached him. He could see the dust spraying to the side, then the dirty, black fur-covered hand shooting out toward him. It hit the space above the grey dust, bounced back, and Trey felt the reverberations through the air. He stumbled backwards, threw the burned-out match to the floor, and held himself up by the wall. How could there be 2? They should have devoured each other a long time ago. That wasn't what was important now. He needed to get to room 409 immediately. If there were 2 of them, he could easily lose his life. Trey heard the elevator groaning. This thing was losing its mind in there. It wouldn't be held back by the dust for long, and if the old woman down at the reception pressed a button, this monster would come after him even quicker. He dropped the empty pouch as he pushed himself off the wall and ran toward the stairs. If there were a 3rd one, he would die, his instincts told him. Should he pull out a match to light his way? No. If he ran with it, it would flicker and die out far too quickly. He hurried up the steps, always listening for the sound of the elevator. If it began moving, it would probably be better for him to quickly jump out of one of the windows. A grimace appeared on his face as he hurried past the 3rd floor and jumped up the steps. For now, nothing was moving. He felt neither cold spots nor the air shifting. Trey told himself that he was still safe, then finally reached the 4th floor and looked along the hallway. It was even dirtier than on the 2nd, but he could see the numbers on the door. The one he was looking for was to his right. Out of breath and sweating, he still forced himself to run toward it. Time was of the essence. Sliding over the dirty carpet, he reached it. Room 409. Pulled out a set of lockpicks and quickly started his work. His fingers were shaking, which was making it far harder, but Trey still managed to open the old and cheap lock in under 5 minutes. Sweat was now breaking out all over his skin. He felt it, the vibrations running through the floor of the building. Something had happened. One of the two had gotten out. Trey pushed open the unlocked door and stumbled into a room that looked like it hadn't had a visitor in decades. A thick layer of dust covered everything, from the walls and floor to the furniture. There was a double bed and a small table, a basket in the corner. He swallowed hard and put a hand up to cover his nose and mouth from the dust flowing around the air. A cold breeze touched his back. He jumped into the center of the room, whirled around, and pulled out the matchbox. The vibrations were getting stronger. It was coming, even without him drawing it in. Trey took out a match and struck it against the sleeve of his jacket. The air whirled around him, pulling dust along with it. There was a disturbance in there. He could see it in the way the dust flowed. Trey braced himself as the light flickered, and in the next split second, something black and covered in fur flew at him. His scream got stuck in his throat as he was taken off his feet. The strength of the impact threw him backwards and against the bed. Trey heard wood creaking and could see the match sailing through the air. 2 dark hands were grabbing him, long nails digging into his jacket. A mouth opened wide, so close to his face. He could smell its stinking breath. Trey screamed as he pulled out the dagger he had taken with him and stabbed it into the black thing holding him in place. It didn't feel like thrusting a blade into flesh. No. The metal of the weapon turned ice cold as it vibrated, and the curse let out a scream that even reached him. His high-pitched cry pierced his eardrums, but the claw stopped digging into his shoulder as the thing staggered backwards, then collapsed to the floor. Trey was up on his feet in an instant. A normal job would be done already, but right now he didn't have the time. He pulled out the crystal that was vibrating wildly and pushed it into the fallen-over curse on the floor. The thing screamed again as it started to move and shift, its form trembling. Next to it, the match was burning weakly, illuminating the room that seemed to have a completely different atmosphere from the rest of the hotel. It felt colder and far more sinister. Trey picked up the match and watched its flame die out. He'd already used up 3 of them. Sweat was running down his forehead, and the pain in his back had now finally reached him. On the floor in front of his feet, he could now only see the crystal, no longer translucent, but slowly filling up with black smoke dancing in the air. If he were honest, he wanted to simply leave the hotel now. He had gotten what he had come here for, or would in another few seconds, but that other curse was still out there. It would either attack him or turn this hotel into a grave if he simply left. Tremors ran through the floor, and Trey sighed. He pulled out a death whistle and turned it over in his hand. It was better to finish this up quickly. Another tremor ran through the floor. He needed to be prepared before he blew the whistle. Pulling out the 4th match, he took a quick breath, then struck it against his jacket once more. The smell hit his nostrils as the air began to move. He turned around, lifted the whistle to his lips, and watched the particles flowing through the air, then suddenly stopped and held his breath. There, in the corner, the thing he had thought was a basket was moving. It was rocking back and forth in the rhythm of the vibrations. He felt a chill far stronger than ever before in his life. The flame flickered as it came alive, and Trey could see the wounded and slowly dissolving creature at his feet. Its red eyes stared up at him. No, past him. He breathed out and heard the sound of the death whistle filling the air. A scream answered from below, followed by another one coming from the thing in front of his feet. It was weak and sorrowful, and for a moment he could see its eyes narrowing as it stared past him. Trey felt a chill in the air, worse than ever before. A third one answered the whistle, quieter, higher pitched, but closer. Hot breath touched his neck. He looked up and could see the flame of the match flickering. Vibrations were running through the ground as the one from the second floor broke free and came up toward him. But he couldn't concentrate on it. Something was watching him. He looked up. There, on the ceiling, was a being with red eyes staring at him. It was smaller than the other two he had seen, but the hate in its gaze was exactly the same. Two hands reached out to him as it dropped down. Small but long fingers grabbed hold of his head. Trey wanted to scream as it took him from his feet. His body hit the floor and the shout turned into a groan. The dagger slid from his grasp. Red eyes were staring at him. It was the last thing he saw before long, sharp claws dug into his face. A final scream came from his mouth as the vibrations through the floor got stronger and stronger. There were more of them, cursed beings that lived in groups. Trey spotted, then groaned, before his fear and pain finally dissipated in death.